Welcome to Session 4 of a Bible overview called Law and Land. In our last session, we learned how God miraculously brought the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. Now they need to learn how to be a nation and take hold of the promises God has given them. As the Israelites traveled toward Mount Sinai, they were in the desert for approximately 2 months, and it was difficult to find food and water. They complained bitterly to Moses and Aaron and even wished they were back in Egypt. They were a challenging people to lead. When the people complained or came to Moses with a problem, he did not try to fix it himself. He always went to God in prayer to ask for guidance, to find out what God wanted him to do. The Bible says he fell on his face before God. God cared for his people in several ways. 1, when there was bitter water, God made it pure. 2, when there was no water, Moses struck a rock at God's command and water gushed out. 3, when the people complained about not having enough food, God provided manna, a small granular food that was on the ground every morning and melted in the sun. They were to collect only the amount of manna they needed for their family for one day and were to depend on the Lord to provide the next day's food. It was a test of their faith. In addition, God provided meat for them by causing quail to fly so low in the evenings that they could strike them down. When they arrived at Mount Sinai, God continued to reveal his power and presence to the Jews. He did so in a powerful thunder and lightning storm, in a dense cloud that came down on the mountain, in the loud blast of a ram's horn, in smoke when he descended on the mountain, and in the shaking of the mountain. Only Moses could go up to the top of Mount Sinai to meet with God. It was there that God gave instructions and laws to Moses so that these millions of people could live in an orderly fashion as a new nation after being in Egypt for 400 years. So it was at Mount Sinai that God gave them the 10 Commandments to obey, also called Terms of the Covenant. Let's read that in Exodus 20, verses 1 to 21. And God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain and smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. Notice that the first 4 commandments have to do with our relationship with God, and the last 6 have to do with our relationships to others. God went on to give them more laws, including the building of the tabernacle, a movable tent which was necessary because they often changed locations. The tabernacle itself was made up of two parts, the larger outer chamber called the holy place, and the inner room called the Holy of Holies, or Most Holy Place. An enclosed courtyard surrounded the tabernacle. Daily, people would enter the courtyard to confess their sins and bring their sacrifices. Sin needed to be taken seriously. When a person saw an animal killed by the shedding of its blood, they were sensitized to the seriousness of their sin and guilt. The need for an unblemished animal symbolized the moral perfection demanded by a holy God. The holy place was entered daily by priests who conducted rituals to honor God. It was separated from the most holy place by a curtain. Only the high priest could enter here, and then only once a year on what is called the Day of Atonement. The most holy place contained the Ark of the Covenant. The ark was built to hold the Ten Commandments. It symbolized God's covenant with his people. The top was called the atonement cover. Two golden angels stood on the top of the ark with the atonement cover in between. God's presence was above the cover. So to summarize, the tabernacle is the place where people could restore their relationship with God. Since the human heart is sinful and God is holy, God provided the blood sacrifice as a way for grace instead of judgment. He set up the system of sacrifice to help the people keep their relationship with Him. And it was here that God's presence was revealed. Next we'll read Exodus 32, which tells us what happened while he was gone. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. And then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. "Lord," he said, "why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth'? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever." Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, "There is a sound of war in the camp." Moses replied, "It is not the sound of victory, it is not the sound of defeat. It is the sound of singing that I hear." When Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf the people had made and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. He said to Aaron, "What did these people do to you that you led them into such great sin?" "Do not be angry, my lord," Aaron answered. "You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, 'Make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him.' So I told them, 'Whoever has any gold jewelry, take it off.' Then they gave me the gold, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." Moses saw that the people were running wild and that Aaron had let them get out of control and so become a laughingstock to their enemies. So he stood at the entrance to the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to him. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side. Go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor." The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Then Moses said, "You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day." The next day Moses said to the people, "You have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." The Lord replied to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Now go, lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin." And the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron had made. After this event, the people camped at Mount Sinai for approximately 2 years, and God continued to give them laws before they left, which would be approximately 650 laws in all. The next book, Leviticus, is basically about the law and how to live a holy life. The word holiness is mentioned 152 times. God also gives specific instructions about different festivals for worship and how to perform the sacrifices. Let's read Leviticus 17:11, which tells why a blood sacrifice was necessary. "For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you to make atonement for yourselves on the altar. It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life." Along with daily sacrifices, there was the very important annual event called the Day of Atonement. It is described in Leviticus chapter 16. It is the greatest day of the year for Israel. Atone means to cover. Once a year, the high priest entered the most holy place and sprinkled blood on the top of the ark to atone for the sins of the entire nation. Leviticus 16:2 says, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come whenever he chooses into the most holy place beyond the curtain in front of the atonement cover on the ark, or else he will die. For I will appear in the cloud over the atonement cover.'" This event also included 2 unblemished goats, which represented the 2 ways God was dealing with the Israelites' sins. Let's read about this in Leviticus 16, verses 7 through 10 and 20 to 22. "Then he is to take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to cast lots for the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord and sacrifice it for a sin offering. But the goat chosen by Lot as the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to be used for making atonement by sending it into the wilderness as a scapegoat. When Aaron has finished making atonement for the most holy place, the tent of meeting, and the altar, he shall bring forward the live goat. He is to lay both hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the wickedness and rebellion of the Israelites, all their sins, and put them on the goat's head. He shall send the goat away into the wilderness in the care of someone appointed for the task. The goat will carry on itself all their sins to a remote place, and the man shall release it in the wilderness. The people would watch this scapegoat walk off, knowing that not only were their sins forgiven, but their guilt as well. This all showed the offer of God's grace instead of judgment. Today, the Jews still celebrate the Day of Atonement, which is called Yom Kippur. Let's return to Moses and the people at Mount Sinai. At last, God told Moses that he should lead the people into the promised land. But first, he wanted Moses to send in 12 spies, one from each of the tribes, to learn what the people, their cities, and the land were like. The spies were gone 40 days, and when they returned, they told the people that the land was wonderful. It flowed with milk and honey and was bountiful in food. But on the negative side, the cities were well fortified and the people were huge. 10 of the spies said that the Israelites could not possibly go against the people of Canaan and take this promised land. But 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, had the faith that God would be with them because, 1, God had made a covenant with them that he'd give them this land, and 2, they had personally seen God lead them out of Egypt and across the Red Sea and more. So they encouraged the people to have faith and obey. But the people's hearts were afraid, and they refused to enter the promised land. God was furious that the people didn't have faith in him after all he had done for them. So their disobedience caused God to send judgment. Let's read Numbers 14, 26-35. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "How long will this wicked community grumble against me? I have heard the complaints of these grumbling Israelites. So tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. In this wilderness your bodies will fall, every one of you 20 years old and more, who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. As for your children that you said would be taken as plunder, I will bring them in to enjoy the land you have rejected. But as for you, your bodies will fall in this wilderness. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored this land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will surely do these things to this whole wicked community which has banded together against me. They will meet their end in this wilderness. Here they will die." The book of Numbers is about those 40 years of wandering. There is one story in Numbers that you need to know because Jesus refers to it in the New Testament. Let's read Numbers 21, 4-9. They traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom, but the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in this wilderness? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. Then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived. We see judgment in the snakes, But grace was offered so people could live if they obeyed God's way of saving them. They had to look up at the bronze snake on the pole. They had a choice to make whether to look up or not. In the New Testament, in John 3:14 and 15, we'll read how Jesus refers to this incident because it foreshadows his death on the cross and how we have to look up to him to save us from our sins. After the Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, the unbelieving generation died off, and by God's grace, the next generation entered the promised land. In addition, because of their faith, Joshua and Caleb were permitted to enter the land. Now we're to the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses reviews the Jews' history and repeats much of the law. God repeatedly stresses that he will bless the Jews, which is grace, if they obey his ways, but judgments if they disobey him. At the end of this book, Moses transfers his leadership to Joshua in Deuteronomy 31:7 and 8. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, "Be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." Right before he died at age 120, God allowed Moses to stand on a mountain and see the promised land. Then God said to Joshua in Joshua 1:2-9, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." It is repeated here that obedience is the key to their success. Next, we'll read about the great miracle of how the Israelites crossed the Jordan River from the east to the west side. We'll read Joshua 3:7 and 8, and then verse 14 through chapter 4:7. "And the Lord said to Joshua, 'Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river.' So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the sea of the Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, 1 from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When across the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." As we read here, the Jordan River was at flood stage, yet it piled up in a heap as soon as the feet of the priests, by faith, stepped into the water. Their obedience allowed God to act on their behalf. The 12-stone memorial was built so that future generations would always remember that God had brought them there. As they entered Canaan, God was very specific about how the Israelites were to conquer the land. It is important to know that the people living in Canaan worshipped many gods or idols that centered around child sacrifice, prostitution, and witchcraft. Moloch is an example of an idol which demanded children be sacrificed in its fire. In contrast, God's people were to worship the only true God and separate from the wicked cultures around them. God wanted to protect them from being infected by evil religious practices. Let's read some examples of this. First, Exodus 23:32-33. "Do not make a covenant with them or with their gods. Do not let them live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you." Next, Leviticus 20:22-24. "Keep all my decrees and laws and follow them, so that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. You must not live according to the customs of the nations I am going to drive out before you. Because they did all these things, I abhorred them. But I said to you, 'You will possess their land. I will give it to you as an inheritance, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God who has set you apart from the nations.'" Also Deuteronomy 18:9-14. "When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. You must be blameless before the Lord your God." Next, Numbers 33:55-56. "But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They will give you trouble in the land where you will live, and then I will do to you what I plan to do to them." Last, Deuteronomy 7:3-11. "Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. This is what you are to do to them. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their idols in the fire. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your ancestors that he brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the land of slavery, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. But those who hate him, he will repay to their face by destruction. He will not be slow to repay to their face those who hate him. Therefore, take care to follow the commands, decrees, and laws I give you today. And there is another reason why it was important for the Jews to remember God's ways and obey them. Deuteronomy 4:6 says, "Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations who will hear about all these decrees and say, 'Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people.'" When the Israelites entered Canaan, the first city they attacked was Jericho, whose walls were 25 feet high and in some places 20 feet thick. It was supposed to be unbeatable. As we read what happens in Joshua 2:1-18, note how the people of Jericho had heard about God. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. "Go look over the land," he said, "especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan, and as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death." "Our lives for your lives," the men assured her. "If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, "Go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way." Now the men had said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house." In this story, we have an example of how people living in idolatrous nations knew of God and had the chance to avoid judgment if they chose faith in Him. We'll continually see how God offers grace before judgment. Rahab is actually one of the few women from the Old Testament who is mentioned in the New Testament. She is in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, as she will be King David's great-great-grandmother. Next, God gave His battle plan for conquering Jericho in Joshua 6:1-5. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, March around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in. They must have doubted that this actually was a battle plan, yet they obeyed and did as instructed. As God promised, the walls fell down and the Jews captured the city. It was such a miracle that only God could get the credit. Let's read verses 22 to 24 to see what happens to Rahab. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. It's important to know that before the Israelites took Jericho, they had been given a warning in chapter 6, verse 18. "But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it." But a man named Achan disobeyed and took some objects and hid them in his tent. Thus, when the Israelites went into battle next against the town of Ai, they were defeated. Some of the Jews were killed. Joshua went to God in anguish because he did not know why this had happened. God told him that someone had disobeyed his warning and taken treasure for himself. Losing the battle was his judgment. When Joshua found out that Achan and his family were guilty, they were put to death. This story shows that when we sin, we are not the only ones to suffer. Other people also suffer. We see this in our daily news, how the innocent suffer because of others who are evil. The rest of the book of Joshua is basically about how the Israelites conquered much of Canaan. This book also describes how the land was divided among the 12 tribes. Now at last they possessed the land, as God had promised in the Abrahamic covenant. The book of Judges, chapter 2, verses 7 and 8, tells us what happens to Joshua. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. In this session, we have learned about the Israelites' journey in the desert, the tabernacle, the 12 spies checking out the promised land, Moses' death, Joshua's leadership, how the walls of Jericho fell down, and the conquering of the promised land. In the next session, we'll learn about the judges, or the military leaders, whom God sent to Israel as his means of grace towards them.